You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Hello and welcome to 2025. The guys and the girls ended up on Lenupa looking for the Atatin coordinates, which is meant to be down in the cave underneath Skullridge Mountain, and found that Renard had lots of hidden booby traps that was going to trip them up. But, well, we kind of knew it was probably going to happen at some point. Jod, he turns heel and tricks SM33 into allowing him to become the new captain. He bests Fern in what would have been a fight to the death. The kids, well, they just hightail it out of it.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file.
That doesn't sound too hard.
Boom! This is Making Tracks.
This is the way.
Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
I know these people. They are brutal. Does this look Jedi to you?
That's not how the Force works.
They'll never see it coming.
Count me in.
Misa back.
So, episode 6, Zero Friends Again, basically picks up exactly where we left off last week's episode. This week's episode was directed by the wonderful Bryce Dallas Howard. Isn't it about time that they gave Bryce either her own series or her own film?
Totally agree. She's got such a good hit rate for the stuff she's done, and now she comes along to this and delivers another charming episode. I think one of the nicest aspects of this episode being as good as it was not because it stands out as a great episode. It continues a run of great episodes. Everything we've seen so far has been consistently great. And so, yes, in the same way that we entered 2025 wanting a dad, Ron Howard, to come back and do Solo too, now you see Bryce doing such a great job with what she's done in the galaxy, and hoping that, not only does she get more TV work because she does such a great job of it every time she enters the galaxy, but also, it's 25. We've got a Star Wars film coming up next year, Mando and Grogu, directed by Jon Favreau. We're all excited, and I'm sure it's going to be great. We're going to hear more about it, hopefully at Celebration and throughout the rest of the year. But if they don't at least consider Bryce Dallas Howard as a contender for directing a Star Wars film, I do think they're missing a trick, because she delivers action, she delivers heart. She's great with the cast. Everything she's done has been superb. The only one you might point a finger at that was less than stellar was the episode of Season 3 Mando that she did, but then nobody came out of Season 3 Mando covered in glory anyway.
You're spot on with that. I mean, I suppose the question is whether or not she wants to do a film. I mean, I've not actually heard her speak. With that in mind, this episode, Zero Friends Again, we've seen this in a couple of the other streaming series from Star Wars, whereby they take an episode where really, in the grand scheme of things, not a huge amount happens, and it gives you a chance to kind of really get to grips with some of these bits of tension which are bubbling under the surface between characters. You kind of learn a little bit more about the characters as well. If I'm going to do my summary next week, it's going to be probably pretty short. However, it also doesn't do it justice, because there's been a lot of moments in this episode.
It's 32 years ago this week since DS9 launched. And the thing that set that show apart from all of the Star Trek before, and probably most Star Trek since, was that the characters were often in conflict. And in this episode of Skeleton Crew, it's the first time you've seen needles between the kids, because kids are kids and they're always going to poke and prod, and that's a kid thing. But there was actual proper conflict this time, where Fern and KB had their falling out. This is the first time we've seen real friction between the two, because we've wanted that KB moment. We got the KB moment here. Yeah. As much as it was KB's episode, it also gave Wim a great moment where he gets it together, follows the instruction, pulls it out the bag to fix the little fuse that keeps KB's systems online. So that was great. But you saw the friction between her and Fern, and also poor Neil had to make a choice of, what do I do? Do I stick with my best mate? Do I go with Fern? And then you saw her and Neil figuring things out. You see Wim and KB figuring things out. It was as much as we've got of a lesson, and I'm waggling the air quotes, in that KB has different capabilities, but Fern doesn't seem to see that. Yeah. And KB's frustrated that I'm different. I can't do the things I used to do. Why can't she see that? Whereas sometimes you see differently abled people that enables them to do things that other people can't. And she's saying, no, and we still don't know what the accident was.
Yeah.
I had this accident and I can't do the things that I used to do. And I wish my friend could see that because it's frustrating. I love the way that they weren't smacking us over the head with that.
It was kind of interesting to see it from KB's perspective. It's a hidden disability, right? Isn't it? And it's
in the Star Wars galaxy, yeah, because we saw the modding in Book of Boba, and that was a choice as much as tattoos and ear piercings were a choice.
That almost looked like an aesthetic thing, like you said, almost like getting a tattoo. This is a hidden disability, and on some levels, kind of, I guess, the same way that, like with Lobot, many a comparison you can make between KB and Lobot. He's one step closer to being a droid than he is being a human. From what we see in Empire Strikes Back, KB's kind of humanizing her disability in a way that Lobot hasn't been able to. We saw in the previous episode when we go down to the spa and actually she's a bit worried about the moisture or something getting into her components.
One thing that this show's doing that I love is that generally when they've laid something out, either immediately or a little bit down the line, you get the payoffs. Yes. And that was an immediate payoff, wasn't it, from something that was said last week?
Yes. The risk that this is just one of these things that like a lot of series have to do. Plotting and stuff like that is so much more heavily layered these days. But in the catch-up, you have that brief 2-second clip, don't touch red button. Well, obviously, somebody's going to touch a red button. Did you really need to show it? Because they've done this a couple of times with Mandalorian as well. It's like they remind everybody, well, we clearly know that there's going to be something related to that character or that story point later on about. The thing that Wim kind of learns from this episode is that actually you can kind of be the hero without actually having to do big heroic things.
Yes.
All along, he's very naive and he's kind of very optimistic. He sees a good in everybody. He sees a good in John. He's clearly spent way too long reading the Jedi stories or comic books or holo books or whatever you want to call them. And so he's probably got that worldview. And you also look at Fern. She is more well off than the rest of the other kids, a little bit spoiled and seems to get her own way quite a bit. Therefore, she's having to kind of actually learn that actually you kind of need to slow down a little bit for people. You can't always do stuff by yourself and you need to rely on your team members.
Yeah, Fern struggles when people aren't immediately switched on, but then also her reaction to KB at the very end when they hug and sort of the typical kids that you're my best friend or you're my best friend, that bit is lovely. That moment, she seems quite short-tempered. She loves telling the story. She had Wim on a line at the beginning at school. So there's all these little quirky kid relationship things that I thought were really nicely played out. You mentioned that she hasn't necessarily got the most patience and she's getting frustrated at Neil when they're climbing the ladder. And Neil's like, we don't all have the long spider legs like you do. And they do the rope bit. What Neil actually said was right. Well, let's split up and we'll meet when we get there. And Neil figures out how to fly the Onyx Cinder when John chucks him in the seat and he just about does enough to get them away. But we don't know if he'd have had the wherewithal to do what or keep calm like Wim kept calm. And Wim seemed a little bit hyperish to me in places.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking, well, he's been separated from his best mate. Those two are probably stuck together like glue. It's not like they've had a falling out. All he ever says is, oh, well, we'll get there first. You know, again, typical kids thing. So there's no falling out between Wim and Neil.
Exactly. And I think the thing is with Neil is that he doesn't like conflict because he's got such like a pure heart. He's not going to let a member of a team go off by themselves. He's going to go with them. I mean, because there was no real reason for him to go with Fern. And ironically, because, you know, they're having to climb.
He was at a disadvantage, wasn't he?
He was totally at a disadvantage. He by rights should have gone, I'm not climbing that. I'm not built for climbing. I'll go with these guys and follow the trash grabs. But I guess what it comes down to is that up until this point, anybody stood up to Fern in the same kind of way. And actually told her, actually, hang on a sec, you're not right. Her one cheerleader, KB, is the one who's calling her out. That then suddenly completely puts her off kilter. Also,
weirdly, this might bring Wim and Fern closer together because Wim does say to Fern, you know, he said it a few episodes ago when they're on at Akron, you know, you're amazing, you're a great captain, you figured these things out. And then she remembers the nanny droid moment. And now on this one, she's a little bit down on herself again. You know, how are we in this situation? And he's like, you're amazing, you're amazing. So actually, Wim's more of a cheerleader than he probably realises. And I don't know if Fern's, I think probably without realising it, she is taking this bolstering on board. But you're absolutely right. For it to be KB to be the one that's like, annoyed. One moment when she comes out, when Wim has figured out the little chip and she does the mold and he pours the wires. I love that scene.
Yeah.
He's blowing his fingers, but he's not making a big deal. It's obviously hot and he's not making a big deal. He's trying to stay calm. And he pushes the thing in. And afterwards, she sits there for a moment and reboots, and then she sits up, and then she starts speaking, and you're thinking, oh, she's a bit more, I'll say robotic is not the right phrase, but she's a bit more in that mode. You know,
Yes.
oh, well, that was close to a total system shutdown. And then she says the line that's the winning line of the whole episode. Thanks, Jedi. She's paid attention to the fact that Neil and Wim call each other Jedi 1 and Jedi 2.
Yeah.
She knows he's into the Jedi thing. Last week, he had a lightsaber in his hands. You know, she's picked up that that's important to him. And it's the most human line of the whole episode. Thanks, Jedi.
Hi, this is Guy Henry, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Enjoy.
These four have acted the absolute socks off for every single episode, every single moment. You could quite easily expect these kind of performances from somebody who's 5 or 6 years older.
And it makes you want to follow them as they grow as characters. You also kind of want to follow the actors to see how,
Absolutely.
What are these kids going to, what's Keriana going to do with her role in 4 or 5 years' time when we're on season 3 of Skeleton Crew?
Yeah.
You know, what are they going to do with these characters as they develop? Dynamics will change. Obviously, dynamics change, and maybe other people come into it, into their little group of friends and whatever they end up being. Let's pitch down 10 years down the line. We're still getting Skeleton Crew stuff, and these kids are in their early 20s now, and maybe they've joined the Resistance, or maybe, you know what I mean? You can see where they're going to take it if they want to go that way.
Which would be fantastic. And actually, this could be the backdoor way of reigniting the next
Sequel
generation of
trilogy.
Star Wars. Yeah, totally. Yeah. And what's nice is that, you know, every single episode's been a different director. So it's not like you say it's actually one specific director, but obviously it's either the crew or the environment that they've created. I can imagine for an actor, especially maybe even like as Jude Law, it's probably quite easy to get into your own head a little bit, to kind of go, all right, okay, I'm in Star Wars and there's a ship over there, blah, 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 blah. The fact of using the volume, stuff like that, I'm sure you could probably just plonk kids in there and they can just react to stuff, because it's kind of like, it's so much more realistic, quote unquote, than it probably would be for somebody who's done so many other stuff.
It'd be very easy for those kids to get overshadowed by Jude Law. It's a big deal. He's been in and around big projects for a long, long time. He's not dominating the show. That's probably as much credit to him for not screaming to the back row. You know, even though it's pirates and it couldn't be more ooh-ar than it is, it's completely a pirate show. But then Luke did walk the plank in Return of the Jedi. It's not like it's the first time we've seen pirate-related stuff in Star Wars. It's been around for decades, and even further back in the Marvel run. Something you just said makes me think. 8 episodes in this first season. 6 of the 8 episodes were written by John Watts and Chris Ford.
Yep.
The 2 episodes that weren't was last week's You Have a Lot to Learn About Pirates, directed by Jake Schreier, and young John Weisner wrote it. And this week it was Bryce Dallas Howard and young John Weisner, 2 different directors. And now we've got 2 more final episodes to go. We've got Lee Isaac Chung, who's just coming off the back of Twisters, with Watson Ford writing episode 7. And then the final episode directed by John Watts, who, just directed a Spider-Man trilogy that's made a few $1 billion as well. So we're in such safe hands here, but it's specifically to the child actor element of it. It's so easy to get it wrong with child actors. So easy. Yeah. And now I'm not making comparisons to Jake Lloyd. It's been fantastic that this week we've seen Clayton Sandell did a wonderful interview catching up with Jake after his interview with him last year, just to touch base and see how he's doing. And it sounds like he's doing good. So that's fantastic. And in a wonderful world, wouldn't it be great if Jake is able to get back out there in the world and do the odd convention and comes into contact with these kids, just because he'll always be that 9-10-year-old kid for us from Phantom Menace, because obviously he couldn't and didn't take it on to do episodes 2 and 3 because the time leap and so on and so forth. But wouldn't it be great if Jake somehow was able to come back into the galaxy in some form or format and we just see him doing something else, just because why wouldn't you want that? And we've not had that much negativity towards... we're all savvy enough now on social media to know when people are just saying things to push buttons. They just want the interaction. They just want
the ratio. Yeah.
Oh, those kids, there's no charisma in those kids. Oh, they're terrible actors. Oh, that show's rubbish. It looks awful. Yeah, you just want the engagement, mate. I'm not falling for it. So you know that kind of clickbaity crap. We're not playing that game. I've seen no actual well-considered multi-paragraph stuff telling me why Skeleton Crew is rubbish. I've not seen one.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
It's got a lot of heart. That's what it comes down to.
But it's the little moments like that that work so well in Skeleton Crew that
Yeah.
maybe wouldn't work so well in other shows. You could write the plot of this episode on a postage stamp.
Yeah.
You know, Jod comes out of Skull Cave Island with all the loot on him. He gets captured by the pirates. He has a little hearing in front of Captain Brutus, puts his pointer forward enough that they don't space him, and he's just planted enough of the seed. And really, for Jude in this episode, Jod, whatever name you want to give him this week, because goodness knows he's got a different name every week. He's maybe in the episode, 5 minutes? Maybe.
Yeah. But then, like, in that time, again, it's like, I mean, he just excels, doesn't he? The charisma in his character's performance.
Even
like,
the sea shanty worked, didn't it?
Yeah, it's easy for you to say. The sea shanty worked really well. But like that whole hearing, here's your time. And, you know, he's going up to the quarry and he's like, you know, but you want to be like growing whatever it is, mollusk.
Glowweed.
That's the thing. He knows how to run a crew. And when you think about it, it's quite a astute kind of thing to bring up. He talks about the pirates all being hungry. And you kind of go, yeah, not only are they having to scrape from day to day, but actually you think back 95% of all the characters that we see in Star Wars, they're doing exactly the same thing. You know, you go to Ferric, they're having to work from day to day, probably paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
You go to Tatooine, but it's all about the harvest. It seems like nobody really gets ahead in the Star Wars galaxy unless you're already ahead.
Outside of Atatin, which has been closed off from the rest of the galaxy, which is very middle class suburbia, you're on Jakku scrubbing parts from a Star Destroyer to get a few rations to eat that day, or you're on Tatooine, as you say, moisture farming or chopping up whale meat or whatever, like Kenobi was, or you're living on Coruscant like Mon Mothma is.
But then you think you take Mon Mothma, and it's like, what level's she at compared to the hundreds, if not thousands of levels below her, which, you know, I mean, I can always remember, I think as Kevin J. Anderson just kind of described it, it's like the lowest levels, it's subhuman. Nothing grows because nothing sees the light. It's like those dark oceans where you get those really weird alien
anglerfish and that.
The only people who get ahead seems to be the politicians and those who are basically stepping on the heads of everybody else.
And one thing that came up online this week was, obviously we've got 2 episodes of this show to go. Yeah. And then we've got a little bit of a break, and then we've got Celebration, and then we've got Andor Season 2. And Andor Season 2, in terms of what it's about, what it's going to show us, feels like it couldn't be more separate to Skeleton Crew if it tried. Yeah. I replied to somebody on a post about this. I think that the kids in Skeleton Crew are the kind of people that the soldiers in Andor are fighting for. Just to juxtapose the two, it's so difficult to connect the two. They feel thematically different. I mean, they're set in different time periods as well. You're talking a decade plus down.
Yeah.
To take those kids from Skeleton Crew who weren't even born when Andor was happening, but to think that they're just regular people living a life in the galaxy, who are the soldiers of the rebellion fighting for? Who were the soldiers and warriors of the Republic fighting for? Who would the First Order be battling the resistance over? It's people like this. So you can put the two things together. It does work.
That's very true. And I mean, I suppose in some respects, it's a bit like when you open a volume of Dr. Aphra and then you open an episode of, I don't know, even just Star Wars or Darth Vader. You know, the artwork's completely different, but yet somehow it's all Star Wars. It'll be interesting to see if the contrast between Andor and Skeleton Crew actually works, or if actually it harms Andor Season 2's success because of the fact it's so different, you know, in terms of like the type of story. I'm sure there are people who are like, yeah, it's not for me, so I'm not going to watch it. But I'm not even going to bother trying to kind of like scream and shout about it. Maybe I'm being naive when I say maybe the internet has just got bored with criticizing Star Wars, and they've just gone, do you know what? There's other things to criticize at the moment, and Star Wars, you know, it's not going to change. It is what it is. You know, maybe we've gone over that hill, and I don't think so. But it will be interesting to see if Andor comes along and suddenly people are like, can we have more Skeleton Crew and actually less of Andor? Because actually Skeleton Crew's fun and it's easy. You know, there are times when you want to have a challenge when you watch stuff, but sometimes you also just want to see people just going down these massive slides.
Yeah, totally. I just think we're heading fast towards the 50th, which is going to be phenomenal. We've got a movie, as we say, coming next year. We know that Ahsoka Season 2 films this year, and there's other stuff. Hopefully more movies get up and running this year. And so when we head towards 27, we can, one, look forward to a movie, but also more animation and more TV series. One thing that Skeleton Crew's done really beautifully, for the first time, we've really got that zip and sass and wit and energy that Force Awakens absolutely captured perfectly. I think Skeleton Crew is the first thing really in a decade to recapture that energy in live
Force
action.
Awakens magic. Yeah.
Totally.
And also, there's always instances where, like, you know, they're just dropping a line from the OT, but it kind of fits. It doesn't feel like it's been kind of wedged in there. And talking about the OT, is that you had that massive junkyard crab and its little minions, and they're all stop motion. Phil Tippett doing what he does best. I guess actually they kind of felt to me like smaller versions of like what we saw on Ahsoka, those crab people. Spot the space junk and the greeblies on these crabs, man. And there's like one which is carrying like a 3PO leg and a stormtrooper helmet and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, little things like that. I mean, they feel like things that would just be bimmering around in the Star Wars galaxy.
Yeah.
That's one thing that Mando did well. You had the episode that Jack Black and Lizzo and Christopher Lloyd episode that Bryce weirdly directed, where you went to that droid bar, essentially, where the droids just can hang out, which seems like a weird conceit, but it's like they're people living in the galaxy. They're not biological like us. They're mechanical, but they're still there, you know, and they're wise enough and aware enough to interact socially with biologicals. So why wouldn't they interact with each other? We've seen these droid uprisings in Star Wars going back to the old Marvel days, and that kind of worked. And seeing these little crab things, I mean, okay, it was a lure to lead them to Mama Crab, the Tetanus, which was great. And I love the work on that, you know, when they explain in that little mini documentary online how Tippett did it and his team, of course, not just him, you know, and how Doug Chang was there with a glue gun just gluing bits of, you know, Falcon parts onto this thing. You know, love all of that sort of tactile, old school Star Wars feel. So more of that, the better. Just the fact that Phil Tippett's involved is just wonderful. Yeah, I think this episode, just from top to bottom, was just great. Even the music. The music's been consistently great. I mean,
we've not talked much about music at all, really, and that's not definitely a slight at all. I think that's just been one of those things that, like, the music's just kind of sat in and fitted so well.
Hi, this is Neil Scanlon, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
You wonder how much is intentional callbacks, and you wonder like how much is just like a callback because it's Star Wars and it's not a callback. It's just part and parcel of the galaxy and stuff.
Yeah.
Being trapped in, I guess, like a junkyard, you can think about like trash compactors, but it was cool to kind of see how the Onyx Cinder kind of gets away and they destroy the hull. Immediately, that big red button to me was like, oh, that's your self-destruct. That's not like proverbial, like losing the snake skin, as it were, and kind of flying out of there, which was really cool and a nice design. And you kind of see a much more sleeker kind of ship, which kind of almost looks a little bit Nubian.
The new version, two things. Lego needs to pull the finger out and do a new version of the Onyx Cinder.
HasLab.
Very possibly. You imagine being able to pop the outside off. And I'm thinking, I love my Jazzware stuff. Bryce, we've talked all about it, and a lot online all week has been Bryce needs to get more stuff. Why isn't Bryce doing the film? Watson Ford have absolutely freaking smashed it. I mean, they've really got to go belly up to for us to walk away in 2 weeks' time and not go, that was great TV.
I mean, it's been so consistent. You don't see it really feeling like it's going to suddenly take a massive left turn, unless it does take a huge like left turn, but it does it in a consistent way. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? Is if it actually feels like a logical left turn, like with Jod, is he going to kind of have a change of heart again, you know, or is it more of a case that actually he's probably going to have a change of heart when the crew gang up on him, when they work out actually maybe At-Atin was this amazing Old Republic mint, but maybe now it's just like a load of like suburban housewives.
I just think with Jod, because we've seen the heel turn you referred to, because we know how avaricious he is, we've got an element of sympathy for him. In the very first episode, he breaks into that ship, he walks in, there's a credit on the floor. I want to know who got there first, who left that credit, because that was deliberate. Whoever did that knew he was coming, and they left a credit as a middle finger just to say screw you, and there's the credit. So who did that? But also, you can't trust him. You know, we know Solo was a bit shady, so you know there's elements of Solo he was more of a rogue. When you see Solo: A Star Wars Story, you know that Han had a heart and Chewie was his conscience, and that as a partnership worked. The face turn, becoming the good guy to work the rebellion, makes more sense than not. With Jod, if he suddenly comes good and he's a heroic guy, and here we are, you know, a few years after Jedi now, we're moving into a new era. If he suddenly joins the New Republic, that's going to make no sense whatsoever. No. How could you trust that guy?
The only thing I think he could probably do is whether or not if he has to save the kids from Brutus, he's going to space him, he's going to stick him out of the airlock and Hugo Drax him. I'm sure it's, again, might be because he's still thinking of like the big reward at the end of it.
In the same way Griff Karga was like the advocate for the Bounty Hunters Guild, you could kind of see Jod, for example, being an advocate for the pirates in a way.
The Pirate Guild, yeah.
Which is because
Star Wars enough, isn't it? Anyhow, we'll leave it there for today. I will say thank you to you, Mr. Newbold. Everybody else, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've got any questions or thoughts or theories about Skeleton Crew, we'd love to hear.
Email radio@fanthatracks.com. Head to links.fanthatracks.com for links to our social media feeds, Fantha Tracks TV and Fantha Tracks Radio. Thanks to James Semple for the Fantha Tracks intro, Blues Harvest for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. New episodes drop Tuesdays and Fridays at 7 o'clock UK time. Our weekly news show, Good Morning Tatooine, goes live Sundays at 9 o'clock UK time on Facebook and YouTube. And remember, Fantha Tracks is absolutely free, so it costs nothing to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
And that's me done for this episode, Mark.
Excellent. We'll be back very, very soon. So until then, stay safe, take care, and as always, may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.
Well, Mr. Newbold is going to play you a lovely pre-recorded episode. No, pre-recorded recording. Pre-recorded message. That's it. He's going to play you a lovely pre-recorded message.
I love editing.
Sorry, mate.